How did Taiwan become so important in semiconductor industry?
It's a small island. So they focused on one thing. But on the downside, today, most of the business, Taiwanese companies, is in China. So now they have this problem. They need to quickly diversify. And the Chinese companies want to build their own companies now.
Okay.
Right? So Taiwan is in a dilemma. So where are they going to go? The next big country market available to them is India.
Yeah.
We have an Indian market, which is basically owned by foreign companies today. We have an opportunity to create Indian companies, and the Indian companies should focus on the Indian market first, right? Because this is where you learn. The problem that I see for India could be that because we did a lot of software, IT, and all that, right? For foreign companies, right? I hope the semiconductor doesn't take that path.
You have hope that India will not become again an outsourcing arm to the global companies for their semiconductor requirements.
We need to have manufacturing. Without manufacturing, right, you cannot create innovative product. I'm a little bit disappointed with private sector.
Why is that?
So far, it has all been government initiatives. And I'll take this opportunity here to tell my friends in the NASSCOM, put money into this, right? I mean, you guys have, made a lot of money on the back of this country, right? Venture into this.
If an entrepreneur who is new to this industry and has a small amount like $100,000 or 1 crore, how can they become part of this ecosystem?
See,
Hi, this is Siddharth Alwalia, your host at Neon Show and also managing partner of Neon Fund, a fund that invests in best of enterprise AI companies starting out of India, building for the globe. Today, I have with me Raja Manickam sir. You are coming on a podcast second time. Your first podcast was very successful on Neon Show, sir. So thank you for coming again and welcome again.
Thank you. Thank you.
So in a last episode, we explored the basics of semiconductor industry. What are semiconductors, how they are made, why they matter. But the world has changed a lot since we did our last episodes. There's a new president in the US, and it has changed the global macro on where to produce semiconductor. And as AMD CEO Lisa Su points out, like semiconductors has become central to national strategy and not just business. And she's saying 5 years ago, nobody even thought about where chips were made or where you get your next chip from. That's what has majorly changed for this industry. Now it matters where any country is getting their chips from, where are they made, where even the raw materials coming from. So, to start with, what has changed and why are semiconductors suddenly at the center of global strategy, global national politics?
Yeah, I think, it's a good question. But let me go a little bit deeper, right? So I'll explain, what semiconductor is, right? Then that will, drive towards why semiconductor, right? So if you look at, very basic science, right? You got physics, you got chemistry, you got biology, right? And each of them, right, you have formulas, mathematical formula, which you can use to describe those, right? Physics, let's say, motion or light, or a chemical interaction, or a biological or biology, how colors are formed and so forth, right? Now, each of them can be articulated in a mathematics formula, right? Now, the formulas, once you have a formula, you could make that into a semiconductor, right? So if you look at it, a basic transistor, for example, right? So once you have, how a transistor works, theoretically, then we were able to make a transistor physically, right? And that is a semiconductor process, right? So over time, what has happened is, all these formulas and, whether you look at quantum physics, right? Now you can create a quantum computer, right? So a lot of these are whatever you learn in theory and whatever new you are discovering, now you can put it in real use, right? Through the semiconductor process and so on. I mean, semiconductor is a very wide term, right? When you say, it's not just chips, right? Even LED is considered as a, semiconductor. Photonics, is considered semiconductor. So it's pretty wide in that sense. So I think, fundamentally, right, now we have an engine to create products from theoretical things, right? So whoever is able to master this is going to rule the world, right? I mean, this, I think fundamentally that has come to believe, right? So now once they've seen this, where they've become really good at this, they feel that they have a huge advantage, right? I mean, drones is a classic example, right? Whoever is control of how to make a better drone and so on, right, has an advantage, right? Whether for good or bad reasons, right? So I think so the what of semiconductor I explained to you, and now you see why each country is trying to have an edge, to make it their properties and so forth, or has a better product. So this is the why of it, right? And to me, it has become a very fundamental thing that you need in a country, just like roads, right? Right, and especially now we are looking at a digitized world, right? So you need a road for these digits to move, right? If you think about it, right? So semiconductor, you could as an analogy, right, is a road, is the warehouse, is a digital warehouse, right? It's where people come to interact, right? It's a temple, right? Or the mall that you want to. So if you look at it from that analogy, right, it is a very fundamental infrastructure that is required by the country, right? So any country. So that is why governments are now involved. So they are, instead of, just building roads, now you have to build, highways of, where electrons can move, right? Electrons can be stored. So this has become a basic infrastructure. So that is why you see all the countries are very keen on investing in it, creating products that they can have an edge over others, and is going to become very, very competitive. So that's what I think Lisa is talking about. There is a lot of interest, and the other thing is semiconductor, just like a road, right? Nobody thinks about how a road is made, or we just take it for granted. So semiconductor was inside a system, right? Nobody cared about what was inside a system and how it works and so on, right? Because we were operating it on the software side of things, right? That was the connection to the hardware, right? So nobody cared about it. But now, because of all the reasons I told you, where you have quantum, you got photonics, so many different sensors, right? That are being incorporated into a basic chip, in a system. It has become, people are aware of it now, right? There's a lot more awareness, and they want to have a good product and so forth, right? So now, instead of semiconductor inside, now semiconductor is on the outside, getting the limelight.
And let's rewind it to the origins of semiconductor. US invented the semiconductor industry with Bell Labs, Fairchild, and DARPA laying the foundation in 15 and 60s. And despite leading in design, US became dependent on Asia for their most advanced chip making. So why did US, despite having a head start and leading in design, allow itself to lose dominance in fabrication and packaging? Was it just cost, like outsourcing manufacturing to Asia, or a failure in foresight because now they're trying to get it back?
Yeah, I think certainly, costs drove a lot of this, right? They started with packaging being outsourced and all that, and then slowly, other areas, with the fab, wafer fabs being outsourced and so on, right? And what they didn't realize is that, especially on wafer fab at the time, there is a significant amount of interaction that happens between design and the fab, right? So, a feedback loop that exists. You push the design, and which means that you're pushing the process, right? So the process is what happens in the fab. So these two people have to work together, right, in order to create better and better products. Now, once you lose that, the making of it, right, and you focus only on the design, right? So what happened was, now they realize that this technology, on the making of it needs to work, together with this. So I think they felt that, hey, the dependency is becoming more and more, and our innovation is not happening as much as we should. So now there is a scramble for and in this last, I would say 30-40 years, right, we've lost. I mean, when I say we, meaning US has lost the expertise, the capabilities of process, right, and there's so much of concentration in Taiwan, especially in TSMC. They have really mastered it, right? So it was not very sexy to work in a fab in the US, right? Everybody wanted to work as a designer or in software or something, right? Nobody actually wanted to do the hard work of working inside a fab developing processes. So that generation is gone, right? So now you have to start from scratch again, motivate the youngsters to go back to work in fabs and processes and all that. So it's going to take some time, but I think it's the right move, right? To bring at least a higher, processes back to closer to the design capability.
And do you think US now has the right manpower? Obviously, it has all the money in the world to do it, but right manpower to make it happen now?
No, that is why I think they will go through a phase where they will have to come up to speed, right? And also the working conditions, how they work, all of those have changed, right? So when you bring Taiwanese workers, right, to teach and develop process engineers or technicians in the US, the working conditions are different, right? A Korean engineer or a Taiwanese engineer, will work 7 days a week, right, to get the process done and so on, right? Whereas in the US, there is much more restrictions on labor and stuff like that. So I think it will take time, but certainly they have the capability to bring it up. Money wise, right? Obviously, a semiconductor pays really well. So I'm sure being a very capitalist society, people will eventually get into it. It's going to take some time to do it.
So people who are losing their jobs because of AI will go back into semiconductor. That's what you think?
Yeah, that is a good possibility. Yeah, there is a.
One thing and we covered some part of it in our last podcast, but I want to dive deep into it again because such important for this conversation as well. That how did Taiwan become so important in semiconductor industry? Can you go back to the history?
Yeah, I think historically, Taiwan, I mean, geopolitically, right? It was outside of China, right? While China claims that and so forth. And Taiwan was first identified, I believe, by the US and say, hey, look, we got to make them economically, meaningful for us, right? So TI was one of the first companies which, I worked for TI. My first job was TI, but TI was one of the first companies that moved some of the manufacturing there or looked for manufacturing, on the back end and so on. And then Philips had a fab and so on. So I think that was to make them economically strong enough, right? I think geopolitically it made sense that if you want to protect something, right, it must be meaningful. Right, you need to have a reason to protect something, right? If you have an oil field, right, you want to protect oil supply, you will protect it, right? So, there must be some dependence and paid economically. So I think a lot more companies went there, right? And also I think one of the things is it's a small island, right? And so they focused on one thing. Right. See, whereas in India, for example, right, we have many things, right? We have steel making, we have car making, we have, we make textiles or, so we have many, many things that we could focus on, right? So they picked this, right? And Morris Chang was probably one of those guys that identified this as a major role. So I think there was very focused attention to be really good at something, and they really worked on it and got the formula right.
And what's the history of TSMC?
So TSMC, I think Morris Chang was involved, in the early stages, and Morris Chang used to run the fabs in at TI, and he's got a very good history of running fabs and yield and processes and all that. And then when he left TI, he went to another company, I believe, General Dynamics or something in Boston area. And then that is when I think this whole idea about the US and Taiwan started to take shape. And then so he moved to Taiwan, and basically the Taiwan government asked him to see how we can do this. So there was, I think initially he worked at a research thing but his idea was to build very large companies, and so that's how I think he started in the fab. He's a fab guy, right? No one better to do it. But also he was a very visionary person, because at that time people did not believe that a country like Taiwan, which was a lot back at that time, was actually maybe as backward as India, maybe, or maybe slightly better, maybe, but not far off, right? We had SCL Chandigarh, before TSMC. Yes. And TSMC has become world class, and here we're struggling, right? So I think, so that is how he got into, and so he got the right person, right? So I'm a big believer in that one person can make a difference. And he surely did. And he had a huge backing from the government. And I think American and European companies were more than happy to do it. And he was also a very good businessman. Was a very good businessman. There's a lot of good stories about him, how he built the business, where he had to take a lot of losses, but he still persevered and built the business.
Any particular story that you remember or are fond of?
I think in one instance he said, he had to work with Philips, and Philips did not give him enough business or something like that. And then he had to go out and find, the foundry model was something new at that time. And, so he had to basically beg business from other guys, because foundries used to, wafer fabs used to be owned by the product companies themselves. Like TI had their own fabs, and, AMD had their own fabs and so on, right? So it was a different, time at that time. So he had to really beg for, business, just give me a few wafers, business, so that, I can just keep running and so on. So I think his perseverance was kept on. And I think he believed that ultimately, right, he can create a differentiation, even competing with their, internal fabs. So I think that was, for someone like that, right, at that time, where this whole model was new, he could persevere and do it. I think that was amazing. He had the foresight.
Yeah. And obviously, I believe US supported Taiwan, as you said, right? Companies like TI, Philips started putting up their fab plants in Taiwan, and so with support of US government. So at what point in time, did Taiwan become more closer to China than to the US?
No, I think, US was a very open, society in that sense, right? When I went to the US and all that, it was really a land of opportunities, right?
Yeah.
Nobody cared about, how there was no restrictions at all,
Okay.
right? Whether it's technology or, so it was, and Taiwan, right, culturally, right, being, they're very similar, right? So there was, and it was in their backyard.
Yeah.
Right? Less than 1 hour flight, you get there, right? And there was, so doing business for Taiwan, and Taiwan, you got to remember, right, was at a much, much higher level of technology and GDP and all that as compared to China, right? Until the late 80s or so, right?
Yeah.
70s, 80s, when China was much, much lower, right? So it was easy for them to, culturally, there was no difference, right? And these guys, Taiwanese guys were ahead. So for them to sell into China was very easy, right? And a lot of people went there, made a lot of money. In fact, I think Taiwan was the biggest investor in China for a long time. I think next only to Japan, right? So a lot of guys, it was second nature to, for them to do that, right? So it was very easy. But on the downside, today, right? I mean, I was in Taiwan about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And, most of the business, Taiwanese companies, is in China. So now they have this problem. How do they need to quickly diversify? And the Chinese companies want to build their own companies now.
Okay.
Right? And they're saying, hey, thank you, Taiwan, but we want to build our own. So Taiwan is in a dilemma.
Okay.
Right? They need to, so where are they going to go? Right? The next big country market available to them is India.
Yeah. Why not US?
No, US, they're also trying, right? Obvious, for obvious reasons. They are quite successful in that, right? But, for a large market, right, they cannot ignore. And another thing very strange or rather, unique about Taiwan, they're very, maybe they're a small country and so on, right? Doing business for them outside of their own culture is not that easy.
Yeah.
See, culturally, right? And they've not attempted it, unlike Koreans, for example, right? Koreans have moved to, India and, Samsung and all that, right? But, Taiwan, they were very happy with China for a very long time, right? So I think, certainly US, benefiting, like you can see all the servers and all that AI. NVIDIA is very big with Taiwanese companies, supplying to US and so forth. But I think India is a very big market that they're attempting to come.
And, China's rise wasn't accidental, it was strategic. Starting in the early 2000s, China pumped billions of dollars into semiconductors through the National IC Fund, built champions like SIMC, and then aggressively recruited talent. Also, a lot of help from the US during that time. And China has been pouring investments and subsidies to shift the supply chain of semiconductors more favorable to them. What has happened recently is like the US has blocked China's access to some of the world's most advanced chip making tools. But companies like Huawei are still managed to surprise the world with new chips, right? And they are being more indigenous, making it, completely independent now. And are these restrictions really working, the US to China, and how they're pushing China to become more self-reliant? Or you can also go back into the history, how China became such a powerful force in semiconductor. Now we talked about US in 50s, 60s. Then after that, Taiwan in 60s to 80s. But suddenly in 2000 to till now, like China has become the world's largest superpower in semiconductor.
Yeah. See, I opened this podcast with you saying about the what and why, right?
Yeah.
So they realized this, 25, 30 years ago, right? So they're very focused on, like you said, on the strategic impact of semiconductors, right? So they invested in that. And I would say, American companies went for the ride, right? They said, hey, there's a market, we need to be in the market, right? I mean, I was with Fairchild at that time, Fairchild was dying to go to China, right? Motorola went there. Everybody, wanted to go there. And whatever terms, right, these Chinese companies wanted, they gave the terms, right? Transfer technology and setting up manufacturing there and so on, right? And, they were very, like you said, very strategic. Sometimes, we may consider not so ethical, but, it's what it is, right? Formally, we transferred, American companies or, transferred technology. And sometimes informally, they managed to go through the back door and get some technology as well. So I think this was going on. And, US became very capitalistic in that sense, right? It was managed by quarter, and so as long as they get paid, and the market was growing, so technology transfer was not an issue, right? And they quickly grabbed it, right? Every deal that China had, it had to have a technology transfer, right? I mean, you look at even trains, for example, right? Siemens made all the trains, and then now they compete with Siemens, right?
Yeah.
Fiercely.
The world was too short-sighted to realize how China could go so powerful.
Yeah. So, so they, like you said, it is a very strategic movement. They said, if you control semiconductor, you can control, all the products further down the food chain, right? So I think, this was one of their, they had that foresight to do it. Although we are doing it now, right? As you
So
can see.
are we getting the transfer of technology when we are working with a outside India firm?
Not really. I mean, we are getting some old technology in that sense, but it's okay, right? See, I'll tell you about later about a little bit about how India is going to do this, right? Because a lot of water is flown down the river, under the bridge. So we are in 2025, so the approach can be different. So China, I think one was there's a lot of this transfer of technology and so forth, but also I think they had a huge advantage of their own market, right? So they developed a lot of products. Let's say Huawei, for example, right? They developed product for their own market, telecom market, because it was booming for them, right? They have a huge population. And as you know, right, from 1989 or 89, Deng Xiaoping, right, made that, famous thing that, we should, money should be not considered as guilt, it should be, people should be happy to make more money or something like that, from a communist guy coming that, right? So he kind of changed the narrative. And so, then, people making money and building businesses became a huge impact, right? So I think what has happened is now, Huawei, for example, right? So they build products for the local market, and they learned how to sell, how to build, how to get the feedback and all that, right? And the scale was also big, right? So they could reduce the cost. And then now, after they built their local market, they moved out to the foreign markets. So the foreign market was icing on the cake, right? They already have a good business. Now I say, okay, let me sell a few, more, right? So that is how they build, right? So coming to India, we should have the same, in a way, very similar strategy. We have an Indian market, right? Which is basically owned by foreign companies today, right? It's all 100% imported from semiconductor standpoint. We have an opportunity to create Indian companies, and the Indian companies should focus on the Indian market first, right? Because this is where you learn. You learn how to build products, or you learn how to improve on a product, right? Quality, performance, how to sell, how to get the supply chain done, right? Because you're Indian, you're selling to an Indian company, you're in their backyard, right? They will give you those opportunities as well. Then once you learn this and build it, then you go global, which is what China did. I think the problem that I see for India could be that because of the GCCs and because we did a lot of software, IT and all that, right, for foreign companies, right? I hope the semiconductor doesn't take that path, right? Of just supporting other companies and foreign companies and saying that, look, we have semiconductor, which really is not.
And you have hope that India will not become again an outsourcing, let's say, arm to the global companies for their semiconductor requirements.
Yeah. I hope you if the foreign companies come into just like GCCs, right? You have GCCs for services, right? Design and all that.
Global capability centers.
Right. Yeah. And you can also have manufacturing for these companies, right? Like what they have in Malaysia and so on. But I think the focus should be on developing our own Indian companies, Indian products over time, right? So that you can have Infineon for India, or hopefully 10, 15 years maybe in NVIDIA. And it will be different, right? I always say that when a solution coming out of India will be completely different for the same problem. Let's say you give a problem to NVIDIA and to a local company here, right? The solution will be different, right? And I think our solution would be a lot more practical and frugal in that sense, and could become a global solution.
Yeah. And do you think India has mastered this art in other areas? Like, for example, Chandrayaan, right? We are able to launch a rocket to the moon with, let's say, less than 600 crores, less than $100 million. So did India capture on that and started exporting that kind of technology in hardware also?
Absolutely. I think, we already have some green shoots in my opinion, right? Because like I said, right, the solution coming out of India will be very practical, right? And you got to also remember from a business standpoint, right? I just this morning I was in a company called Ambient Scientific, right, which makes edge processors, right? About a 40-50 people team here, small office, right? It's actually in a house, right? 2 floors in a house, and excellent engineers, right? All young people, right? Probably the average age is about 30 or 35, right? And they showed me the layout of the chip that they've done, and I looked at the terminal, the display and all that they have. It's very basic stuff that they're using, right?
Yeah.
If the same thing was in the US, right, you will see these huge displays and all kind of very fancy stuff and so on, and the cost obviously will be much higher, right? So I think we have an inherent advantage in we have a young population, smart people, and now a lot of these diaspora also coming in to hit some of this, right? Like this particular company, it's based in the US, but the entire chip is being developed here, right? So there are 5-6 guys from the US guiding them, right? So I think we are at a good timing in that sense. We can make world-class product. There's no question. It's only a question of whether we want to make it for ourselves or we want to make for somebody else.
Yeah. And one thing that that I want to discuss more about China is now there was a CHIPS Act that President Trump in the US wants to kill the CHIPS Act. So can you throw more light on what was the CHIPS Act?
No, I think the CHIPS Act was part of the strategy where they felt that the dependence, right, on manufacturing has gone out of control, and they want to basically bring it back and all that. So the CHIPS Act was supposed to facilitate that, right? Give companies like Intel or other companies, support in order to bring some of this to India. I mean to the US. But again, politics, right? Because Biden did it, Trump will say, "Oh, let me take a look at it," right? It never happened in the US before like this, but now it's like, because my predecessor did something, I wanted to take a look at it, and I want to do it differently and so on. But I think ultimately, right, a lot of these companies, if they have to do it in the US completely, they will need this, in India we call it viability gap funding.
Yeah.
Right? So that CHIPS Act is basically a viability gap funding.
Got it. Because right now what is happening globally is like there's the giant US, then there's like the giant China, and both countries are pouring endless amount of money into manufacturing, right? And US, I think, sanctioned like $52 billion just to put back manufacturing on track in the US. And Americans have this, that public and private have to work together to bring fabs back home. And China is saying we want to be completely self-sufficient. We don't want anything because US imposed tariff ban and other bans on China. And China is saying, we want to be completely self-sufficient. So where's the world going right now? It's become very polar
Yes. So I think, see, no matter, how you look at it, US will not be able to make everything,
Yeah.
right? And it doesn't make sense, right? So there will be, some amount of, technology, even the CHIPS Act, right? They try to identify what we need for the future, right? So if you're bringing some legacy stuff and all that, you're not going to get funded, right? So they're very, very particular about, having some lead in terms of technology,
Yeah.
right? So that's their focus. I think China will be self-sufficient, or at least make sure that they're not importing from US,
Yeah.
right? So I think that is going to accelerate now, right? Now, I think there's going to be a time when there is going to be some balancing in that sense, right? Already you saw Nvidia's Jensen saying, hey, I have to sell to China because it's a huge market, right?
Nvidia's more than 1/3 of the revenue comes from China or Singapore.
Yes. So if they don't
Yeah.
give that money, right, or if they don't get that market, Nvidia will lose, and someone else will fill up that market.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what they have to make sure.
But then the doubt there was that China is building its capability in AI using NVIDIA chips, and those are routed through Singapore.
There's all things will happen, right? Because once you put some restrictions, right, somebody will try to but those are all not big. I mean, that's all very easy to control these days, right? Because the moment you power up a chip, you can identify where it is. You can build code into that, right?
Yeah.
Which will say, hey, and you can shut it down, right? There are all those possibilities. But I think the real problem, right, or the real success I see is that innovation is going to become not just concentrated in one country anymore.
Okay.
It is going to be India, it's going to be China, it's going to be Europe, it's going to be Japan, right? So there's going to be a lot more fragmented innovation that's going to happen.
Do you think that the world is entering into a new era of prosperity or a recession because of what is happening?
My personal opinion is this, right? It has become so concentrated where, you have these mega factories, in one location supplying to the world, right? The communities were all bypassed, right? The community's involvement was nothing, right? I think we are going back to the roots where there's a lot more distributed manufacturing, distributed usage of how these things are developed. So I think there will be more community-based push, right? I have this feeling that all this concentration of this whether it's a mega factory or mega banks, everything mega, right? I think it's going to become more distributed in the next 10 to 20 years.
Yeah, so just covering the things again that you just mentioned. India can dominate in microcontrollers, which are like less than $5 a chip, which are placed inside washing machines, inside all electronic gadget, inside a microwave, right? And you are saying this is because US and China won't be interested in selling so low cost chips.
Yeah, absolutely, right? See, they I don't know about China, right? I mean, China will take anything. They even if they lose money, sometimes they try to sell. But I think, you look at US or European countries or even Japanese companies for the matter, right? They need to have 55% gross margin and net margins about 40% or so, right? They have certain criteria, right? And they will not be interested in in these kind of products, right? So we could pick a lot of these products, and the scale is also big. And this is where we cut our teeth, right? You build microcontrollers first before you go to microprocessor, right? So there are markets like that we can dominate. And by the way, this is no different from what China did. Big advantage we have is we have a good language advantage for sure, right? And for us to articulate a problem and create a solution is easier, right? I mean, the world's problem in that sense, right? So we have a certain advantages, and a lot of our people were already trained and built on this. In the last 10 years, we have started doing some amount of manufacturing, at least on the system side, right? So the Vividians of the world, Dixons of the world, and so on. Right? So I think the slowly the roadmap is being built.
Okay. And how do you see the next decade would play like? Because you are saying things will get more democratized, right, across many nations. It will not be concentration of power. But how will the next decade, because semiconductors become so important to political, economic importance, will relate to the rise of your national GDP. Let's say, for example, India. If India puts a lot of resources in the next 10 years in this, right, how will it help India become, let's say, a $10 trillion economy?
No, as I said, right, it's like infrastructure, right? Semiconductors should be looked at as an infrastructure play.
Yeah.
It needs a lot of public financing. Okay, if you look at all the, basically, if you look at roads, airports, or railways, or power plants, right? I mean, these are all, a lot of it starts with public financing, public, governmental, push in there. Semiconductor is no different, right? With the digitizing world and so forth, right? So it is becoming actually a public financing, and I think the only thing I have is that the government should also take an equity, in this, right?
In the
Bring
companies.
the private sector, and because you are building this, right?
So you are saying stop giving grants, take equities in the company.
I said, you give part of it, maybe grant or something, or you may lower your part of the valuation so that you get a smaller equity in terms of what a private sector will get, right? And you can become a minority. So, but
But what can Indian government learn from the global counterparts, how they developed it? Did Chinese government take any equity in development of Huawei?
Yeah, I think that the Chinese model is a little bit different, right? Most of these companies are controlled by the Chinese government anyway, right? Whether they take an equity or not, it's questionable, right? But certainly they play a major role in how their companies run, what they should focus on, the roadmaps and all that, right? So they have a strategic play in this, right? Whether through an equity model or not, right? But in India, right, I think it should be more of, because you should let the private sector decide, right? How to run the company and which direction to go, but they should have a say in the roadmap. The other thing is, take an equity, because when these companies become successful, they are going to give you some returns, right? You take the returns and invest in the next frontier, right? Maybe next one should be quantum computing, or whatever is the next, right? So government needs their money, right? You can't keep on taking tax money, right?
Yeah, 70% of Indian government you mentioned $15 billion is going to be allocated more. $10 billion has already been allocated. 70% plus of it is taxpayers' money. So as a taxpayer, I should have some equity in the company.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the argument is, hey, it's going to create jobs and all this, right? But again, I'll say this: semiconductor doesn't create many jobs,
Yeah,
right? Because it's very highly automated, especially manufacturing. Right? It's very highly automated and so on, right? But it's an essential thing that you need to have. And also, I think once you have the manufacturing, it will lead to equipment making and all this. That's where the innovation, a lot of this happens, chemicals and other things, right? So I certainly believe, right, that if you're giving some money, take some equity. You don't need a controlling stake or something like that, because a lot of private companies say, you can't, the government interferes in our running, we don't want to take the money, right? Which rightfully that's a good argument to have. But at least when when you're successful, you get some returns, right? and then you plow it back into the next technology and so forth. So I think the government needs to be a little bit more aggressive in this. And a lot of private companies will say, oh, if you're asking for equity, we don't want the equity. So call the bluff, right? When you're giving, say 10,000 crores, and if the government says, hey, give me 5% equity, and you think the private sector will not give you 5% to get 10,000 crores?
Yeah.
Right? I think it's a very simple argument, right? They will take it, right? So don't, get scared of these private companies saying, oh, we will not come in.
We will leave India. Yeah. But, just coming back to some stats, like India should have its own semiconductor fabs decade ago. In 1987, India was just 2 years behind the latest chip manufacturing technology. Today, we are 12 generations behind. And, let's rewind to some facts about the 80s. India had a shot. We had engineers, public sector fabs, even interest from global firms. What really happened? Like, was it bureaucracy, lack of vision? Where did we lose the plot?
No, so I'll tell you, see, I think politically we had this self-sufficiency and all that. So there was a little bit of reluctance to bring joint ventures or technology transfers, from other countries, right? So there was this mindset about, very socialistic within the country, right?
Yeah.
There are good examples of we chasing IBM out and so on, right? So there was, that era, right? And another thing, if you notice, right, after independence, right, we created great institutions, right? I'm an IIT graduate, right? It's a great institution, right? But after the 60s, 70s, right, it's kind of stopped, right? We stopped making those
institutions,
great institutions. And so those are the, the crucibles for, the future, right? Why is, USA, it's got an MIT, it's got a Harvard, it's got a Stanford, you got, these are the guys, who start somewhere, right? There's a huge amount of research that goes on and so forth, right? So I think, we kind of, stopped on that. And we were, also, very socialistic mindset, we say, hey, these are stuff that Western countries read and so on. So I think there was a lot of mindshare issues that we had, right? And then, also again, politics, interfered, like SEL, a lot of my, colleagues joined SEL or, BEL and so forth. With the hope that this is going to be huge for them, right? And they were all disillusioned, right? We kind of politics came into play, and there's should we invest in technology or should we invest in building toilets or something, right? So there was all these forces that where the money need to go and all that. And let's be very frank, right? We were a poor country, right? We were starting from nothing, right? So I think all of those played a very major role, and there was less and less of funding that went into all this. And also I think the government system that we had, right, like BEL for example, right, had a great opportunity. When as a student I went to BEL, right?
For internship.
Yeah, no, we had a tour, right?
Yeah.
To see, and I would have loved to work for BEL, right? As so because it was a like a Navaratna, right? You want to work there, right? But today, it's far behind, right?
Nobody wants, no IIT wants to work for BEL.
Yeah, so so things have changed, right? So I think we had some good opportunities. We didn't capitalize on it, mainly because the system we were in.
Yeah.
And then I think after Narasimha Rao opened up the economy, then competition came in, and I think now we are much better in terms of awareness, and I think now if we put our minds together, I'm sure we can build world-class company.
In a previous podcast, there are people who are asking in genuine comments, I have 1 to 2 CR. How do I set up something related to in semiconductor ecosystem? Because you don't want everybody with 10,000 CR to come into this, right? You need, if you want an ecosystem to build 1,000 players or 10,000 players to build in this, right? You need people with small investments, and then they can with 1 or 2 CR, and they can maybe start with a very small thing, right? They don't need to build an entire chip or a fab, but they can, make a part of it. And with 1 or 2 CR, they can get, let's say, support of 10 CR or 20 CR to make that happen. But right now, these people are clueless. They understand it's a global once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but how to capitalize on that, right? And we still don't have an answer for that. And what we did is, I think you did your best as an entrepreneur, but as a country, we misplaced focus on design over manufacturing. Right? We excelled in VLSI and chip design talent, but ignored fab and packaging infrastructure. And design doesn't. You designed chips for almost 20 years at Resolve for other companies.
Yeah, we were a service company. Yes.
Yeah. But design doesn't create a robust ecosystem, right? Unless you go into manufacturing, testing, IP ownership, right? So I think you were a lone warrior fighting a battle for 20-25 years. Right now you are getting recognized, but I think this recognition should have come very long ago. And I think we created an excellent brain export model where Indian designed chips abroad and India imported all the hardware. Like Indians were designing those chips, manufacturing those chips abroad, like the Indian talent, and we are importing costly chips, right? I think you were a patriotic. That's why you came back to India.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, maybe I did not. I owe it to in a big way. My schooling. I know IIT. I got the best of the best, right? Highly subsidized. I had scholarships.
Yeah.
Even at that time our monthly fee was 25 rupees. Even that many people could not afford.
Yeah.
And that was also given by the government. So there is a lot of things I owe, right? Who I am today, right? And I also see that as of now, right? As I said, semiconductor is very, very fundamental, right? More so that now with all this digitizing and all that, right? And the solutions that we needs to be, practical solutions for really solving the major problems, the real problems, right? Whether it's climate warming or electrification or, major changes that we need to have in the next 10, 20, 30 years, right? And I don't think the companies that are set up today, right, which are highly profit-minded, right, they're not going to go create those products. Why would they want to sell a $1 chip, right? They want to sell a $20, $100 chip, right? So, in fact, when I was working all these big companies, right, every year we prune business units based on margins, right? If you don't hit a particular margin, right, you basically shut it down or sell it or do something, right? So there was a constant pressure to get more and more margins, right? And so so if you are a fundamental product, right, like in India, right? So this is where I think India is very good at democratizing everything, right? Take for example pharma, right? The parliament has passed laws that there's certain drugs that can be highly regulated from a pricing, right? Price regulated, right? So that the common man will not have a problem, right? And India is a very big market for pharma export, right? Because if you go to Malaysia or any other country, right, a lot of the drugs actually come from India. They are low cost drugs, and these are life saving drugs. It's for the common good, right? So India does a lot of these things like this, right? And I think semiconductor will eventually be something like that. I believe, right, where it will become more and more affordable, right? Already we are seeing signs of, if you look at data centers and all that, right? To build a data center today, right, with the NVIDIA chips and all those power, so and all that, it's a very expensive endeavor, right? Now you know to sell the data center services to people, right? It's going to be very expensive. Right? So is that the solution? right? So I think, India will democratize a lot of this, in my opinion. So people will fight against it, right? Especially the incumbents are going to fight against it. But I think, it's a good thing for the globally it's a good thing, right? Because I think, we will create more and more innovative products, we'll do things differently. Cost-wise, it'll become more affordable. And it is required, right? So I think it's very, very important for India to be a major player in this.
And, there has been a fragmented bureaucratic approach. Are you seeing that change now? Just to give you an example, there was no single empowered semiconductor mission until ISM was created in 2021. Right? And prior policies were siloed across ministries with long approval cycles, red tape, and land and power issues. And unlike Taiwan's streamlined tech-focused governance, India has a policy intent but poor execution. So what are you seeing right now with the setup of ISM?
No, I think, one is, the semiconductor has become a very big buzzword, right? Even Prime Minister talks about semiconductor, right? So I think there's a lot of focus on it, right? Yeah, because have we initiated projects and how are the projects doing? I'm sure the Prime Minister's office is monitoring, what is happening, in all those money that was given in the last, 1.5 years, right? So there is an intent, to monitor and make sure that, things are in place. So I think that is quite different now. And I think, with ISM, there is another, one central body that is doing this. We'll have our, issues, right? But also, I think, to be fair to MeitY and, all these, the bureaucrats, they want to see success, right? They just don't want to give money and then, at the end of 5 years, nothing comes out, right? So they're also trying to help. So, for example, right, on the DLI scheme, right, Design Link Incentive Scheme, very likely they're going to announce a DLI 2.0, right, anytime now. We have given a lot of inputs on, how to give the money to, one is approving, right? After approval, right, getting money from government, how difficult it is, right? And for startups, the poor guys, right? One is their techie guys. They don't know how to play this game, right? And for them, right, how to get, to keep them, and majority of their expense is salaries, right? So if the money doesn't come on time, right, they won't survive, right? So I think government also, through our people like us, right, get the feedback. So how they're going to give money is also changing. It's difficult, right? Because there's so many checks and balances within the government, right? But they're changing, and I can tell you, for the better, right? It's a lot easier to work with the government folks, right? They realize that the startups are the future, and they're helping.
One more thing that I want to cover about is, the 6 plants that India has set up, right? Can you tell about those 6 plants?
I think, the government had a policy of, making a few big investments, right?
Okay.
And so Tata was one of the largest, right? And then Micron, right? I think all of them are, at some stage of, execution right now. Just like anything, right? They have a plan.
I'll read out the names, right?
Sure.
So there is Tata Electronics plant, PSMC in Dholera, Gujarat. There's Micron Technology in Sanand, Gujarat. CG Power, Renesas Star Microelectronics in Sanand, Gujarat. Keynes Semicon again in Sanand, Gujarat.
Keynes, Sanand or Anand, I don't know.
Yeah, Sanand. And SCL Foxconn joint venture in Jewar, Uttar Pradesh. And Tata Semiconductor Assembly and Test in OSAT in Moregaon, Assam. So 4 of these plants are in one region. So can you tell us more about how did the government and the private sector collaborated in setting up these plants? What is the strategic importance of these plants? What are they producing right now? Why is it of national importance, and what will enable India to do in the next 10 years?
So, I'm a big believer that, we need to have manufacturing, right? People might say, hey, why don't we just focus on design, which we are very good at, and let manufacturing be done in China or Taiwan or somewhere, right? But as I mentioned to you, without manufacturing, right, you cannot create innovative products. So you need that feedback and how they work together. So I think that is very, very critical. So we need manufacturing. Now, where do you start? Right? Do you start in the most complex thing is a wafer fab, or something that we can chew on and get to do very quickly in the next 2-3 years? It's a learning curve, right? So OSAT's packaging is a relatively less risk, less complex thing. So that is why 3 of them are OSATs, right? Keynes.
What is the full form of OSAT?
OSAT is outsourced assembly and test.
Outsourced assembly
and test. OS, outsource, assembly and test.
Okay.
Right? So basically packaging, right? Assembly is packaging.
Yeah.
Right? And then you got to test the chip once it's done. So 3 of them are, the Tata has the one in Assam, and then CG Power and Keynes in Gujarat, right? And then they also wanted, the next step would be to have fab, right? So I was involved at that time as well, trying to see how, and I think the PSMC Tata is the first fab initiative, large commercial fab. And they, and given to Tata, you can't go wrong with Tata, right?
Yeah.
They have the staying power, what we call patient capital, right? Even if it's delayed, which will happen, right? Because these are major projects. They can withstand, right? And Tata is, it's a nation builder as well, right? I mean, they've done great things for the country. So I think it's very appropriate, that they take the lead in this. I'm sure there's going to be more fabs that are going to come. And the one in the UP is, focused on I believe, a display, right? LCD display, I think. And then, but, again, in semiconductor, there are many things. To give you an example, there's LED, right? LED is used, in lights, everything, right? You've got LEDs, right? Some form of LED. We don't make any LED in India. It's 100% imported from China, right? So LED manufacturing, LED fab and LED packaging is another very strategic area.
Has India any manufacturing facility in that?
I think this second round, they're going to have. I'm actually involved in one of the companies that I'm advising. There's a less money involved as well.
Okay.
Right? And then you talk about high-powered silicon carbide is there. Silicon photonics is there. So there are many, many things, involved in sensors, MEMS, and they all come under this big semiconductor umbrella, right? But I think, each one of them, right, has a very strategic importance. So I think, the government's job is to enable them and, give support to 1 or 2 companies. And then the private sector has to take off. But I'm a little bit disappointed with private sector.
Why is that?
So far, it has all been government initiatives. Government is picking up the majority of the bill, right? 50% from central government, states 20-25%. So 70-75%, right, is coming from the governments, right? All this.
And why are not companies like Infosys, Wipro?
I think it's a good question, and I'll take this, opportunity here to tell my friends in the NASCOM, put money into this, right? I mean, you guys have, made a lot of money on the back of, this country, right? And you'll make more money again, right? It's not but, venture into this. And, collectively, right, we have plenty of money in the country, right? It's not for lack of money, right?
Or Mahindra.
Yeah, all these guys, they have money. And I think one of the other things I always, feel is, the country has many families, wealthy families and so on, right? And they invest in, different things. Let's not look at, investing and getting returns in 3 years or 5 years, right? One is, look at a longer horizon, maybe 10 years or 15 years, which is what semiconductor requires. The other thing is, some investments you will make money, some you will not, right? Which is okay, right? Don't feel that, every investment you have to make money, right? So I think, that's another, if you look at historically in the US, why they're successful, whether it's Silicon Valley or Seattle, right? The local people in that area invested.
You're saying the local families invested?
Local families invested. Local, businesses, right? Like let's say somebody has got a coffee chain in Seattle, right? They were the first guys who invested in Microsoft, right? So
yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, so the local people got involved, right? So this again, it's a community that built it, right? We need that community feeling, and say, we have all these rich people in Mumbai, right? They could easily fund, some of these 100 crores for 1,000 people, 10,000 people in India is not a big amount. Bangalore would have 1,000 people who can put 100 crore each, right? And they won't even know that they've taken 100 crore out of the bank, right? This is a very wealthy country, right? It's concentrated in a few people.
Yeah, like for example, Bangalore has people like Flipkart founders, the Zerodha family, Kamath brothers. For them, 100 crores is nothing.
So what I'm saying is, get involved, right? And some of it will work out, some of it will not work out. But in the end, right, you would have created the ecosystem. You would have created, people of knowledge and so on, right? Go beyond the family. That's what I'm trying to say, right? Adopt the startups as your family, right? So I think the private sector needs to get involved more, in my opinion. I think government has done a good job.
You're satisfied with the work that has been done by the government?
I think so. It's always room for improvement from how they disperse the money, how they monitor, and so on, right? But they've done a reasonably good job for a government, right? In fact, I think the government is quite generous.
So what would you do to bring private sector actively involved in this?
I think, they're starting to see, right? See, for example, right, NVIDIA, is a great example, right? The great valuations, right? Are there opportunities, right? To get good market valuations. Maybe it takes a little bit longer, but there seems to be a story there, right? So a lot of I personally am giving a lot of talks to the finance community, and they're starting to open up their purse. They're a little bit not used to this, right? Because most of the funding goes towards salaries or to tools, right? In our business, right? So they're not used to and the salaries are very high, right? So a lot of this funding, right? They're not used to paying people 50 lakhs, 60 lakhs, 1 crore, right? They say, oh, when I don't take that kind of money, right? So I think it's a mind share.
Yeah. I think more people maybe need to have Tata-like attitude of nation building, and obviously the returns will follow if you are able to build certain industries.
And it's a success, right? You're not throwing money away just for the sake.
You're not doing charity.
Yeah, it is, but I would really think that, private sector has to understand and come big in this. Government can only do so much.
Yeah. And now I'll because we are towards the end of the podcast, would like to highlight what the work that you are doing at iVP and what's your vision right now. What are you launching?
Yeah. So iVP, right? We want to be. We are a fabless company, chip company, right? What I call, we need to create demand in India, right? To fill up all that capacity that is coming up. And I feel that, we need to create Indian, products, right? So iVP is a power, focused on the power segment. And we already have a catalog of, 300 over products now, we are selling. We already have revenue. For a company that is only 1 year old, right? We already have some revenues and so on. So we hope that we'll be one of the large chip companies in the next 3 to 4 years, because our market is here, right? So we're very, very focused on Indian market. We want to make our customers performance better as compared to other products. So we're working closely with them. This is very new for our customers as well, because they're so used to just getting something from China or something and then just build a box around it and put a brand and sell, right? So now we are engaging them at a chip level to design better products. So it's something new for them as well. So it's they're very, very happy about it. So it's very, very positive. What we're starting to see. So I think again, timing is good. Then they will take us globally in the next few years, because once they learn how to make good products in India, right, then we can start to sell to the world. Yeah, it's good. It's good.
I'll just highlight some of the policies that India has in semiconductor space, like the India Semiconductor Mission, ISM, which we discussed about, launched in 2021 with a massive 76,000 crore rupee budget, or a $10 billion budget, an incentive package across fab, display, compound semis, OSATs, ATMP, and design sectors. So many initiatives, as I highlighted. Which are the ones you think are making the most buck for the dollar right now, which are going to impact India in the next 5 years, making it, taking India to, as you said, like semiconductors now infrastructure, right? So giving India as much power as Nitin Gadkari is putting on the roads.
Yes. So I think certainly the manufacturing infrastructure, right, is a definite missing link, right? Just to give you a little bit of history on this, when my previous company Tesol, when I started in 2003, I was I came to Bangalore and I was trying to and I've never done business in India, right? So we approached KIDB, right, Karnataka Investment Development Board or something, right? And I presented to them, hey, I want to do this test lab and so on, right? And they were very keen on this, right? So I was very surprised, right? Because we were not a software company or something, right? And they said, oh, you are the missing link, right? Because you're the hardware guy. Nobody has, come with a hardware proposal, right? So they were very, very keen on this. So this is more than 23 years ago, okay? Or 22 years ago. So I think, what has happened now is certainly, whatever they're doing on the manufacturing, very, very critical that they become successful, right? If we have a fab today, let us say, a commercial fab, I can tell you, there'll be a lot more chip startups who will, use it and become very successful. So that's a missing link for us, right? So the sooner, the Tata fab comes up, the better for the country, for a lot of startups. Having said that, right, same with OSATs, right? They're all doing something in their own. I think the missing link, in my opinion, is on the funding DLI and the chip companies. They are the demand creators, right? So you need to create demand, right? So L&T is is one of the companies that has put their own money into it, right? They've not got any DLI that I know of. There are possibilities of maybe putting overall structure about where we need to have our own chips, right? Whether it's LED or microcontroller or whatever it is, right? Or power, right? And then coming up with the that we have all of these products made locally by different companies and then coming under one umbrella. I think that could be something that they can do a little bit better job, right? While you are giving 10,000 crores to all this, and you are giving, 5 crores, 10 crores, 15 crores to chip companies, which are the guys, who really need that a lot more help. So I think a little bit more focus on that and bigger budgets for these guys. And also some amount of hand-holding, required through, maybe consulting companies coming in outside of India to help them as well. The other thing, you see, a lot of these companies, right? The issue is cash flow, right? So instead of giving grants like this, right? Why not, give them soft loans or interest-free loans for so many years and so on, right? And then they can get out of the process, right? So, they basically government backs the banks, right, to do this, right? So the default would be, the government will pay off the banks, right? So something like that, right? Will be a lot easier to do, and the bank is a commercial entity, right? So they will have the agreements with the startups and all that. So I think that route would be a lot more. You can create a lot. Your money will go a lot more, right? Because you're only involved in the interest, right? The interest payments, right? Not the actual capital, right? So I would say maybe fine tune it a little bit differently, and it let's say we start a company, right? We will go to the bank and ask for a loan, right? It's easy. That's process, right? The immediately the bank will say, show some collateral, your house or your jewelry or your land or whatever it is, right? Which they don't have, right? So the bank, so the government steps in and say, oh, don't worry about it. I'm behind these guys. I will help them to be successful. You please go ahead and give them the loan. For the first 5 years, we will take care of the interest and so forth. Something like that, right? Will take us a long way. Easier for us to also work. So the government is not involved. We are not sending receipts to the government to get reimbursements. Everything is now smoothened out. So low-cost loans and soft loans will be a better way of creating more companies and move faster.
Got it. And you mentioned about the Tata, what outcome it is producing right now. So it's said that India is now designing 3 nanometer chips. But upcoming fabs like Tata PSMC will start mature nodes like 28 nanometer chips, right? Whereas Taiwan and South Korea both design 3 nanometer chips, right? So how does this work? Like, how do we decide as a country or as Tata, what are the kind of chips that we need?
See, you got to understand, right? In a system, right? You need all kind of chips, right? If you are doing let's say an AI-based server or something, right? You need 2 nanometer, 3 nanometer, 5 nanometer, that range, right? Which goes in there. It's you're in a solar farm, doing inverters, right? You don't need that, right? You need 180 nanometer or even bigger, right? So, and even for the server, right? Even if you look at the server, the processor may require, but there are power chips and there are other peripheral chips which doesn't require 2 nanometer or 3 nanometer. So having said that, right? So my view is this: even if somebody is willing to transfer technology in 2 nanometer, 3 nanometer, we are not in a position to take it. We can't absorb it. We just can't do it
because we don't have capability to manufacture it.
Yes, we don't.
What is required to do that?
So even Intel couldn't do it, right? They have a history, right? But yet they couldn't do it.
Okay.
So let us not kid ourselves, okay? So you start, whether it's 20 nanometer or 40 nanometer or 65 nanometer, it's a way for you to, in the next 10 years, right? You will slowly start to catch up. And there are products that will work in this that is also required. So it's not that, you just some old technology, so it's going to disappear or something like that, right? So, so all of these are required in a system. So it's okay to start with,
And you still think it's okay because both Taiwan and South Korea manufacture 3 nanometer chips at scale. And you're saying India will take 10 years to reach there.
Definitely. 10 years is a good, is very optimistic.
Okay.
See, remember, TSMC started in the 80s, right? And for them to master 2 nanometer, 3 nanometer, even for them, right, the yields and all that. And Samsung, basically is what, you're talking about in Korea, right? I was involved in the TI, when they came to ask for DRAM technology those days. I was a DRAM test engineer. So TI actually transferred some technology to Korea. And that's how they got into semiconductor. I'm talking about 80s.
Yeah.
Okay, so look at, this 40 years, right? So I don't think, we are ready to do that, right? And we should not, right? There'll be only, until, so 10, 15 years, it's okay. And whatever we do, it's useful, right?
Yeah.
It's not that, it goes...
and keep on importing the 3 nanometer chips as we are doing.
Yeah. I mean, that's why NVIDIA is so highly valued, right? Only NVIDIA can make that chip.
Yeah.
Can you believe? Only NVIDIA.
No, but it's mentioned that both Taiwan and South Korea can also make the 3 nanometer chips.
No. See, we have to design the chip,
Yeah.
right? So NVIDIA designs the chip and uses them for manufacturing.
Okay.
Right?
So nobody else has the technology you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit more complicated because they also have the software and all that goes along with the chip. Right?
Okay.
So they have a lead on that. There are microprocessors, like Apple or Intel, which are using 2 nanometer, 3 nanometer, but they're not as efficient as probably an NVIDIA chip.
Okay. And TSMC, as you mentioned, is only designing it on behalf of NVIDIA. Let's say if India wants to get a 3 nanometer chip from TSMC, India can't do that today.
No, you can. We can design a 3 nanometer, which is, by the way, is being done, right, in India. They tape it out to TSMC.
Yeah.
And they get the chip. Okay. Now, the 2 nanometer, 3 nanometer that we are doing is not for Indian company. We are doing it for Qualcomm or somebody else, right? That may come out of India as part of the design.
Understood.
GCCs, right? Which is what they're doing, right? So, Indian company designing a 2 nanometer, 3 nanometer, Indian company, not a GCC.
Not a GCC.
It's a ways off.
Okay.
I would say probably 4-5 years from
okay. now. Thank you so much, Raja sir. I think this is a rabbit hole. It goes as deep as it can go and there is no end to it, right? To know about this ecosystem. My just parting question is, if an entrepreneur who is new to this industry, and we got a lot of comments and I highlighted it before in the podcast, has a small amount like $100,000 or 1 crore, how can they become part of this ecosystem?
Certainly, it requires a lot more money, right? But there are many, many areas, right? Or equipment making or, within equipment making, right? Somebody makes a chuck, a vacuum chuck or something. So there's a lot of small investments that will come along. And this is where I'm also telling the government, for the small guys, right? They can only put 1 or 2 crores, right? 2 crores, 3 crores maximum, right? They can do. So help them. So let's say they put 2 crores, you put 7 or 8 crores. So make it a 10 crore pot, right? 10 crore, you can get something done, right?
And become a 50% owner. These people would be happy.
Yeah, they will be happy. They will be willing to give, 50%, 45% or whatever, right? So we're trying to tell the government, right? Because that's where the job creation happens. A lot more job creation, a lot of innovation happens there, right? If you look at Taiwan, there are thousands and thousands of companies supporting TSMC and all that, and their sales may be 10 million, 5 million a year.
Can you give a more concrete example of what industry specifically or what equipment specifically?
See, so there's a good example in Coimbatore. There's a company called YES, which actually make a deposition equipment for the wafer fab. They made the entire equipment out of Coimbatore. They started about, I think, 7 or 8 years ago as engineering development in Coimbatore. Because I was involved in, they were using our building, right? So then slowly they started, sourcing some small components in the Coimbatore area. Of course, Coimbatore has a lot of, these kind of, small shops, right? They're very good at reverse engineering, right? So they made, small things, right? Some cables, some machine shop, some chucks and, all simple stuff, CNC machines and all that. And then they realized, the YES, the company, realized, hey, we can get all these things for 30% or 40% cheaper, right? And then they started to say, okay, let's make more out of this, right? So they started teaching them to make a little bit more precision equipment, precision stuff, right? Now, they have to now invest. Like you talked about, right? Maybe, 3 crores, 4 crores, 5 crores to buy some, a better machine, right? They can afford to some extent, but these are the guys that will need some help, right? To take them to the next level, right? They're doing CNC for some industry, maybe some steel industry, ball bearings or whatever, right? Now you have to go to the next level. And all they need is, some help in CapEx. So we have hundreds and thousands of companies that we can create out of this.
Yeah, and we can create a very rich ecosystem supporting each other.
Absolutely, you're right. Because,
So is the government capital only the missing piece to create this ecosystem? What else is required?
A lot of this, we're working with Applied Materials and all these, right? So they want to create these companies, right? To work with them, right? So their lack of, working capital and CapEx.
Yeah, and you think the larger companies are willing to support and incubate these companies?
Yes, they're willing to incubate because they benefit, right?
Yeah.
They become suppliers to them, right? See, equipment making is basically, the big companies like Applied Materials and Lam Research and all that, they're big fab equipment. They basically integrate, right? They have thousands of suppliers, thousands. And each supplier will be a small guy. And I think that is what is required in India, right? Not one massive company, sucking up all the capital.
You're right. Thank you so much again, Raja sir. It's been an amazing podcast again. Thank you for coming on Neon Show for the second time. And we got into much more depth, much more numbers, much more stats. So it's a very good, follow-up for the first conversation. We set out the basics of the semiconductor industry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your service to the nation.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.